Welcome to MRII's Insights and Innovators podcast, where we talk to top market research professionals to get their inside stories about innovative and enduring best practices. Today's episode is sponsored by MMR Research Associates. MMR Research Associates is an agile, full-service marketing research firm with a global support network that performs customized research around the world. Now, here's your host for today's episode.
I'm John Last, President of Sports and Leisure Research Group and past President at MRII. We're thrilled to have Lisa Courtade, Vice President of Global Business Insights and Analytics at Organon, on the show. Lisa has over 30 years developing research talent in the healthcare industry with roles at Merck, Aventis, and Pfizer. In this episode, we'll dive into the evolving skills and mindsets needed to succeed as a market researcher in today's fast-paced, data-driven healthcare world. Lisa will share her unique perspectives on bridging the gap between technical expertise and business impact. Don't miss this insightful conversation on the future of market research talent. Welcome, Lisa.
Thank you, John. It's a pleasure to have an opportunity to connect and catch up with you today.
Absolutely. Well, I want to start. We all kind of joke around in the profession about how, in many ways, research found us rather than we found research. How did you get into it, and what was your first job in the profession?
So I'm a little unusual in the field of research because I actually went to school to get a degree in research at the University of Georgia. And in some ways that did find me because I had a business professor who recommended the program to me. And I was always sitting on a fence between being a graphic designer, which was my first career, and a love of math and science and statistics, which was where I went on the second place. And market research was just such a great marriage of the two of those things. And it was like finding my calling, but I found it in graduate school. So my first job, and I had to think about this because I had several market research experiences before I'd say, what was that? First, I was hired to do market research. That was my career, and it was a full-time job, and it was working for Tyco, and actually a company that it was called Sensormatic back in those days that was commercial security and surveillance. And I was their first hire to do market research. So that was my very first opportunity really early in my career to define what market research could do for an organization.
Interesting. I share that in pioneering the research function in a couple of organizations that I worked in. Was it difficult sometimes to get people to buy into what you were doing, or was there a real hunger for it?
There was actually a lot of interest in doing it, but not a lot of knowledge of what it was. So it put me in a position of having to come in very early in my career in this growing company and meeting with people, understanding what they were trying to achieve as business leaders, and explaining what market research was and what it could do for them. And as I look back on that, I was so grateful for that opportunity in retrospect, because I never took for granted that people knew what market research was and how it connected to their business in a way that maybe if I'd gone into a larger company with a more defined culture around it, I would never have had to be pushed into that so early. Clearly, it was successful. I was there for a number of years, growing it and building those relationships. And at multiple times in my life, have had to create a function, sell a function, reimagine a function. And it's that same process of really starting with, well, what's the business trying to achieve? And then how can insights and analytics really drive that for them?
So fast forward, and that probably translates to some degree even into what you're doing now. Obviously, kind of starting the function in a brand new company as part of a major pharmaceutical organization. Tell our listeners a little bit about what you're doing now.
So Organon is an amazing company with just an incredible mission to address unmet needs in women's healthcare. And we actually have a very broad portfolio, both in women's health as well as biosimilars, and our large established brands franchise that was part of our legacy spinoff from Merck, where I was for a number of years. the opportunity at Organon was to create and lead an integrated boundaryless research team that's focused on a broad umbrella of insights and analytics that includes market research as well as competitive intelligence, forecasting, data science, analytics, lots of capabilities. It's constantly growing, but the idea is how do we bring all of these functions together and deliver a source of truth for the organization? So, fantastic opportunity to innovate in a company that is itself innovating and looking at how it can operate differently in the world.
I love the way you use in search of truth, because sometimes when people actually ask me why I got into research or what I love about it, that's exactly one of the things I always talk about. I say I love what I do because it really learns the truth, particularly in a world today where marketing and just general spin makes it so difficult to understand what's real and what's not. If you think back, I mean, it's been a great ride for you over the years, but when you first got into it, what would be some advice that you might give your earlier self, or things you wish you had known about market research when you were earlier in your career?
Oh gosh, it's been a wild ride, and a lot of learning and growing along the way. Many of it the hard way. Um, I think I'd start with perfect data only exists in a classroom. And, early in my career, I spent a lot of time trying to get my R squareds higher than zero point 0.9. And I'm like, because in the classroom, you could always get a 0.98 or a 0.99. The real world, actually, a 0.9 is a pretty good score. But even today, dealing with the world of data, dealing with a lot of insights coming from a lot of different sources, some credible, some not, I have to remind people that there is no perfect data. And part of what we do is interpret that data and find the best possible answer and get as close to that as possible with incomplete information along the way. I think some other things I would have said to myself is, the most technically competent person doesn't always win. So you can be a fantastic methodologist, you can be an incredible project manager, and these things are really important. But if you cannot communicate to regular human beings about the value of what you're doing and why you're doing it and how it can help them, it's meaningless and worthless. And that's a really hard lesson to learn and a really important one to have. And then as somebody who was a very strong methodologist and loved data and loved research design, it's actually the approach that delivers the greatest value for the business that is the best one to go with.
It's interesting. Again, a lot of commonalities, having personally worked on the client side before starting my firm. I always like to talk about the best researchers were the ones that had a broader business background or a marketing background, because that's how you understood the application of what you were trying to do. Those who had the courage to tell a story and deliver it in a way that really was going to help whoever your stakeholders were really the ones that got ahead. And I was kind of unique. It sounds like you were too, in that in a lot of my early positions, I also had responsibility for marketing, and I always valued research as kind of that fulcrum, if you will, in the center of the wheel of information that guides those decisions. It kind of translates into, particularly today, when people have such limited time spans and everybody's trying to do the work of 3 or 4 people, the skill sets have probably evolved a bit over time. From your perspective, what's the most important skills that today's market researcher can have?
I feel like you've taken this right off right out of my mind in describing some of your experiences, because I'd say for the first decade, 2 decades of my career, and gosh, that makes me sound old, I put a lot of emphasis on those hard technical skills. And I still think those are important. And you have to have that, because that's your competency, that's your credibility to be able to do this. But when I look at the key skills for market research today and in the future, I'm looking for people with strong business acumen. They have got to be able to tie the work that they do to impact and results that matter to the business. They have to have an ability to integrate across multiple sources of insight and be methodologically agnostic. I feel like we've spent way too much of our energy, time, brain space over the years arguing are the analytics team right? Are the market research team right? Is the social media team right? Is the forecasting team right? All of these, they're all right. They're just all different pieces of a puzzle. And the person who can bring those pieces together and show a clear picture is really the one who's going to deliver that value. And then I think the third thing I would add to that is a learning mindset, because the world, technology, business, our customers, it's not static. So, I am grateful for the great foundation that I've had and the many experiences I've had, but the business problems and challenges I'm facing today and the tools that I have to address those are vastly different than they were 10 years ago, and even than where we were 5 years ago. So you have to have that growth and learning mindset and really be applying yourself.
Of course, it always still comes back to being able to translate it in a way that has utility. And it kind of goes back, I think, when I got started, and there was that more of an emphasis on the technical side and the analytical side. I always joke around that I would lead presentations in the methodology section, say that if you want me to give you a statistical dissertation or talk about confidence intervals and the like, I'm happy to do that. And I still think to this day, I've maybe only had one or two people ask me to do that. It translates perhaps to what we as people that run research organizations look for in talent today. How challenging is that? Is it easier? Is it harder? Is there a different approach or focus that you have in trying to find the people that comprise your team?
So it's really a tale of two perspectives, because on one hand, there are lots of people on the market with experience. The challenge that I've found, and it makes me very sad to be honest, is that a lot of them, that experience is out of date or it's lopsided. So I've interviewed or had career conversations with dozens, maybe even hundreds of people over the past few years, and they're looking for a job that doesn't exist in today's world, where they can work on a single brand in a single country with a single audience type, doing just projects and maybe a certain kind of project that they like to do. So they're defining a very narrow box. What I have more difficulty with is finding talent that has those core skills, but is also consultative, innovative, flexible, multidimensional storytellers. And I'm really looking for people who are scrappy. They can solve problems using a wide range of skills and tools. They're staying engaged with the industry. They are demonstrating a learning and growth mindset. And so I look for things and ask questions around, what certifications have they done? What additional training courses have they taken? What conferences are they going to? What have they learned? And sometimes I hear, well, I couldn't afford to go to conferences. I'm like, okay, what have you read? What have you learned about? There's so much free content online. So many different places to pick up ideas. What have you seen that's interesting? How are you thinking about that? How have you applied it, or how are you going to apply it? So I'm really looking for that forward thinking versus, hey, I'm looking for a job from 1992. Do you have any of those for me?
Absolutely. We're just about out of time, but I can't let you go without delving a little bit further into the vertical that you've spent the bulk of your career in, and clearly, there's always been that argument about Is it better to be an expert in research, or is it better to have vertical knowledge? My conclusion is it's probably good to have both. And the vertical knowledge certainly can differentiate you and put you into more of a consultative position. When we think about something as vast and evolving as healthcare, what makes healthcare different than some other areas of research?
So I'm going to tell you what makes healthcare differently, but I'm also going to tell you why have I stayed in healthcare. It wasn't where I started, and it's not even the only industry I've ever worked in. But when my boys were little and they went into the office for Take Your Child to Work Day, they were like, "Mom, we love your job because you save people's lives." And for me, when I go in every single day to work, I'm glad they took that away, because that's at the core of everything I do. That's my passion, is that through the work that I do to understand patient needs, to understand barriers and access and unmet needs in healthcare, not only can we identify and bring to market life-saving drugs, we can also improve people's quality of life. And that gives meaning and purpose to what I do. So my job has never been, although some days it might feel that way, to design PowerPoint slides, to design surveys, to have Zoom meetings. My job is to be the voice of that patient in this world. And healthcare is a very complicated vertical. I think there's a lot that we can learn and transition. And I've made a life and a career out of looking at solutions and approaches in other industries and adapting them to be fit for purpose for healthcare. But healthcare is, as you noted, highly regulated environment. There are huge privacy and legal requirements. The availability is very different than it is in consumer packaged goods. The stakeholders and how they interact can be very complex from country to country: patients, physicians, payers, pharmacists, policymakers, distributors. And then you have different people buying the products, then are using the products, and you have learned intermediaries. So it's not a one-to-one relationship most of the time. And then you have these emerging sites of care and care extenders. So a lot of the things that are out in the world today that I'm excited about, there's do-it-yourself solutions and technology solutions and AI, but that's not always fit for purpose, because many of those solutions don't have the right security or privacy capabilities or even the right sample. And I've done lots of investigations and even head-to-head trials, and going out and getting 100 Gen Pop responses to a survey nets very different results than if you go talk to people who have diabetes and you're trying to test responses to a new medicine or solution in that field. They're not comparable. You just can't do it and get a reliable result. So it adds that extra layer of complexity. And I think as privacy legislation gets stricter around the world, my friends and colleagues in other industries are starting to have to deal with some of the things that we've had to manage from the beginning.
Definitely an added layer of rigor from some of the other more mainstream product categories. Lisa, it's been great to catch up with you. It's been great to have you on the podcast series, and thank you not only for being here, but for being such a great part of Marketing Research Institute.
No, thank you, John. Always fun to talk about this passion.
Absolutely.
Thanks for joining MRII's Insights and Innovators podcast. Be sure to subscribe and listen to all of our podcast episodes, and visit us at mrii.org for more insights for market research professionals.